Foxhead, Pod of the Broom, Catkin Pixie, Little Fern Swish. Where did she arrive from? Like a wish wished and gone, her I chose at secrets and whispered to, when we were playing houses. I was sunstruck at the basilica door. A stillness far away, a space, a dish, a blackened tin and knocked over stool, like a tramped Neolithic floor uncovered among dunes, where the bent grass whispers on like reeds about Midas's secrets, secrets. I shut my ears to the bell. Head hugged, eyes shut, leaf ears. Don't tell, don't tell. A stream of pilgrims answering the bell trailed up the steps as I went down them, towards the bottle-green, still shade of an oak. Shades of the Sabine farm on the beds of St. Patrick's Purgatory. Late summer, country distance, not an air. Loosen the toga for wine and poetry, till Phoebus returning routs the morning star. As a somnolent hymn to Mary rose, I felt an old pang that bags of grain and the sloped shafts of forks and hoes once mocked me with, at my own long virgin fasts and thirsts, my nightly shadow feasts, haunting the granaries of words like breasts. As if I knelt for years at a keyhole, mad for it, and all that ever opened was the breathed-on grill of a confessional, until that night I saw her honey-skinned shoulder-blades and the wheatlands of her back through the wide keyhole of her keyhole dress, and a window facing the deep south of Lough opened, and I inhaled the land of kindness. As little flowers that were all bowed and shut by the night chills rise on their stems and open as soon as they have felt the touch of sunlight, so I revived in my own wilting powers, and my heart flushed like somebody set free. Translated, given under the oak tree. I had come to the edge of the water, soothed by just looking, idling over it as if it were a clear barometer or a mirror, when his reflection did not appear, but I sensed a presence entering into my concentration on not being concentrated as he spoke my name. And though I was reluctant, I turned to meet his face, and the shock is still in me at what I saw. His brow was blown open above the eye, and blood had dried on his neck and cheek. "Easy now," he said. "It's only me. You've seen men as raw after a football match." What time it was when I was wakened up, I still don't know. But I heard this knocking, and it scared me, like the phone in the small hours. So I had the sense not to put on the light, but looked out from behind the curtain. I saw 2 customers on the doorstep, and an old Land Rover with the doors open, parked on the street. So I let the curtain drop. But they must have been waiting for it to move, for they shouted to come down into the shop. She started to cry then, and roll round the bed, lamenting and lamenting to herself, not even asking who it was. "Is your head astray, or what's come over you?" I roared, more to bring myself to my senses than out of any real anger at her, for the knocking shook me, the way they kept it up, and her whinging and half-screeching made it worse. All the time they were shouting, "Shop, shop." So I pulled on my shoes and a sports coat and went back to the window and called out, "What do you want? Could you quieten the racket, or I'll not come down at all? There's a child not well. Open up and see what you've got. Pills or a powder or something in a bottle," one of them said. He stepped back off the footpath so I could see his face in the street lamp, and when the other moved, I knew them both. But bad and all as the knocking was, the quiet hit me worse. She was quiet herself now, lying dead still, whispering to watch out. At the bedroom door I switched on the light. It's odd they didn't look for a chemist. Who are they anyway at this time of the night? She asked me, the eyes standing in her head. I know them to see, I said, but something made me reach and squeeze her hand across the bed before I went downstairs into the aisle of the shop. I stood there, gone weak in the legs. I remember the stale smell of cooked meat or something coming through as I went to open up. From then on, you know as much about it as I do. Did they say nothing? Nothing. What would they say? Were they in uniform? Not masked in any way? They were barefaced as they would be in the day, shouts thinking they were the be-all and the end-all. Not that it is any consolation, but they were caught, I told him, and got jail. Big-limbed, decent, open-faced. He stood forgetful of everything now, except whatever was welling up in his spoiled head, beginning to smile. You've put on weight since you did your courting in that big Austin you got the loan off on a Sunday night. Through life and death, he had hardly aged. There always was an athlete's cleanliness shining off him, and except for the ravaged forehead and the blood, he was still that same rangy midfielder in a blue jersey and starched pants, the one stylist on the team, the perfect, clean, unthinkable victim. Forgive the way I have lived indifferent. Forgive my timid, circumspect involvement, I surprised myself by saying. Forgive my eye, he said. All that's above my head. And then a stun of pain seemed to go through him, and he trembled like a heat wave, and faded. Black water, white waves, furrows snow-capped. A magpie flew from the basilica and staggered in the granite, airy space I was staring into, on my knees at the hard mouth of St. Bridget's bed. I came to, and there, at the bed's stone hub, was my archaeologist, very like himself, with his scribe's face, smiling its straight-lipped smile, starting at the sight of me with the same old pretense of amazement, so that the wing of Woodcairn's hair fanned down over his brow. And then, as if a shower were blackening already blackened stubble, the dark weather of his unspoken pain came over him. A pilgrim, bent and whispering on his rounds inside the bed, passed between us slowly. Those dreamy stars that pulsed across the screen beside you in the ward, your heartbeats, Tom, I mean, scared me the way they stripped things naked. My banter failed too early in that visit. I could not take my eyes off the machine. I had to head back straight away to Dublin, guilty and empty, feeling I had said nothing, and that, as usual, I had somehow broken covenants and failed an obligation. I half knew we would never meet again. Did our long gaze and last handshake contain nothing to appease that recognition? Nothing at all. But familiar stone had me half numbed to face the thing alone. I loved my still-faced archaeology, the small crab-apple physiognomies on high crosses, carved heads in abbeys. Why else dig in for years in that hard place in a muck of bigotry under the walls, picking through shards and Williamite cannonballs? But all that we just turned to banter too. I felt that I should have seen far more of you, and maybe would have. But dead at 32. Ah, poet, lucky poet, tell me why what seemed, deserved, and promised passed me by. I could not speak. I saw a horde of black basalt axe heads, smooth as a beetle's back, a kern of stone force that might detonate the eggs of danger. And then I saw a face he had once given me, a plaster cast of an abbess done by the Goran master, mild-mouthed and cowled, a character of grace. "Your gift will be a candle in our house." But he had gone when I looked to meet his eyes, and hunkering instead there in his place was a bleeding, pale-faced boy, plastered in mud. The red-hot pokers blazed a lovely red in Jerpoint the Sunday I was murdered, he said quietly. "Now do you remember? You were there with poets when you got the word, and stayed there with them, while your own flesh and blood was carted to Bellaghy from the fuse. They showed more agitation at the news than you did. But they were getting crisis first-hand, Colum. They had happened in on live sectarian assassination. I was dumb, encountering what was destined. And so I pleaded with my second cousin. I kept seeing a grey stretch of Lough Derg, and the strand empty at daybreak. I felt like the bottom of a dried-up lake. You saw that, and you wrote that. Not the fact. You confused evasion and artistic tact. The Protestant who shot me through the head I accused directly, but indirectly you, who now atone perhaps upon this bed for the way you whitewashed ugliness, and drew the lovely blinds of the Purgatorio, and saccharined my death with morning dew. Then I seemed to waken out of sleep among more pilgrims whom I did not know, drifting to the hostel for the night. My brain dried like spread turf, my stomach shrank to a cinder and tightened and cracked. Often I was dogged on my own track of blood on wet grass that I could have licked. Under the prison blanket, an ambush stillness I felt safe in settled round me. Streetlights came on in small towns. The bomb flash came before the sound. I saw country I knew from Glen Shane down to Toom, and heard a car I could make out years away, with me in the back of it like a white-faced groom, a hit man on the brink, emptied and deadly. When the police yielded my coffin, I was light as my head when I took aim. This voice from blight and hunger died through the black dorm. There he was, laid out with a drift of masked cards at his shrouded feet. Then the firing party's volley in the yard. I saw woodworm in gateposts and door jams, smelt mildew from the byre loft where he watched and hid from fields his draped coffin would raft through. Unquiet soul, they should have buried you in the bog where you threw your first grenade, where only helicopters and curlews make their maimed music, and sphagnum moss could teach you its medicinal repose. Until, when the weasel whistles on its tail, no other weasel will obey its call. I dreamt and drifted. All seemed to run to waste, as down a swirl of mucky, glittering flood, strange polyp floated, like a huge, corrupt magnolia bloom, surreal as a shed breast, my softly awash and blanching self-disgust. And I cried among night waters, I repent my unweaned life that kept me competent to sleepwalk with connivance and mistrust. Then, like a pistol growing from the polyp, a lighted candle rose and steadied up until the whole bright-masted thing retrieved a course, and the currents it had gone with were what it rode and showed. No more adrift, my feet touched bottom, and my heart revived. Then something round and clear and mildly turbulent, like a bubble skin or a moon in smoothly rippled loch water, rose in a cobwebbed space. The molten inside sheen of an instrument revolved its polished convexes full upon me, so close and brilliant I pitched backwards in a headlong fall. And then it was the clarity of waking to sunlight and a bell and gushing taps in the next cubicle. Still there for the taking. The old brass trumpet with its valves and stops I found once in loft thatch. A mystery I shied from then, for I thought such trove beyond me. I hate how quick I was to know my place. I hate where I was born, hate everything that made me biddable and unforthcoming. I mouthed at my half-composed face in the shaving mirror, like somebody drunk in the bathroom during a party, lulled and repelled by his own reflection. As if the cairnstone could defy the cairn. As if the eddy could reform the pool. As if a stone swirled under a cascade, eroded and eroding in its bed, could grind itself down to a different core. Then I thought of the tribe whose dances never fail, for they keep dancing till they sight the deer. Morning stir in the hostel. A pot hooked on forged links, soot flakes, pumping water. The open door brilliant with sunlight. Hearth smoke rambling, and a thud of earthenware drumming me back until I saw the mug beyond my reach on its high shelf, the one patterned with blue cornflowers, sprig after sprig repeating round it, as quiet as a milestone. When had it not been there? There was one night when fit-up actors used it for a prop, and I sat in the dark hall, estranged from it, as a couple vowed and called it their loving cup, and held it in our gaze until the curtain jerked shut with an ordinary noise. Dipped and glamoured then by this translation, it was restored to its old hair-cracked doze on the mantelpiece, its parchment glazes fast. As the otter surfaced once with Ronan Salter, miraculously unharmed, that had been lost a day and a night under loch water. And so the saint praised God on the loch shore. For that dazzle of impossibility I credited again in the sun-filled door, so absolutely light it could put out fire. As if the prisms of the kaleidoscope I plunged once in a butt of muddied water, surfaced like a marvellous lightship, and out of it silted crystals, a monk's face that had spoken years ago from behind a grill, spoke again about the need and chance to salvage everything, to re-envisage the zenith and glimpsed jewels of any gift mistakenly abased. What came to nothing could always be replenished. Read poems as prayers, he said, and for your penance, translate me something by Juan de la Cruz. Returned from Spain to our chapped wilderness, his consonants aspirate, his forehead shining, he made me feel there was nothing to confess. Now his sandaled passage stirred me on to this. How well I know that fountain, filling, running, although it is the night. That eternal fountain, hidden away, I know its haven and its secrecy, although it is the night. But not its source, because it does not have one, which is all sources' source and origin, although it is the night. No other thing can be so beautiful. Here the earth and heaven drink their fill, although it is the night. So pellucid it never can be muddied, and I know that all light radiates from it, although it is the night. I know no sounding line can find its bottom, no woody ford or plumb its deepest fathom, although it is the night. and its current so in flood it overspills to water hell and heaven and all peoples, although it is the night. And the current that is generated there, as far as it wills to, it can flow that far, although it is the night. And from these two a third current proceeds, which neither of these two I know precedes, although it is the night. This eternal fountain hides and splashes within this living bread that is life to us, although it is the night. Hear it calling out to every creature, and they drink these waters, although it is dark here, because it is the night. I am repining for this living fountain. Within this bread of life I see it plain, although it is the night. Like a convalescent, I took the hand stretched down from the jetty, sensed again an alien comfort as I stepped on ground, to find the helping hand still gripping mine, fish-cold and bony. But whether to guide or to be guided, I could not be certain, for the tall man in step at my side seemed blind, though he walked straight as a rush upon his ash plant, his eyes fixed straight ahead. Then I knew him in the flesh, out there on the tarmac among the cars, wintered hard and sharp as a blackthorn bush. His voice, eddying with the vowels of all rivers, came back to me, though he did not speak yet, a voice like a prosecutor's or a singer's, cunning, narcotic, mimic, definite as a steel nib's downstroke, quick and clean. And suddenly he hit a litter basket with his stick, saying, "Your obligation is not discharged by any common right. What you must do on your own. The main thing is to write for the joy of it. Cultivate a work-lust that imagines its haven like your hands at night dreaming the sun in the sunspot of a breast. You are fasted now, light-headed, dangerous. Take off from here, and don't be so earnest, so ready for the sackcloth and the ashes. Let go, let fly, forget. You've listened long enough. Now strike your note." It was as if I had stepped free into space, alone with nothing that I had not known already. Raindrops blew in my face as I came to, and heard the harangue and jeers going on and on. "The English language belongs to us. You are raking at dead fires, rehearsing the old whinges at your age. That subject people stuff is a cod's game, infantile, like this peasant pilgrimage. You lose more of yourself than you redeem doing the decent thing. Keep it a tangent. When they make the circle wide, it's time to swim out on your own and fill the element with signatures on your own frequency, echo soundings, searches, probes, allurements, elver gleams in the dark of the whole sea." The shower broke in a cloudburst, the tarmac fumed and sizzled. As he moved off quickly, the downpour loosed its screens round his straight walk. Sweeney Redivivus. The first gloss. Take hold of the shaft of the pen. Subscribe to the first step taken from a justified line into the margin. Sweeney Redivivus. I stirred wet sand and gathered myself to climb the steep-flanked mound, my head like a ball of wet twine dense with soakage, but beginning to unwind. Another smell was blowing off the river, bitter as night airs in a Scotch mill. The old trees were nowhere, the hedges thin as penwork, and the whole enclosure lost under hard paths and sharp-ridged houses. And there I was, incredible to myself, among people far too eager to believe me and my story, even if it happened to be true. In the Beech, I was a lookout, posted and forgotten. On one side under me, the concrete road. On the other, the bullock's covert, the breath and plaster of a drinking place, where the school leaver discovered peace to touch himself in the reek of churned-up mud. And the tree itself a strangeness and a comfort, as much a column as a bowl. The very ivy puzzled its milk-tooth frills and tapers over the grain. Was it bark or masonry? I watched the red brick chimney rear its stamen course by course, and the steeplejacks up there at their antics like flies against the mountain. I felt the tanks advance beginning at the cynosure of the growth rings, then winced at their imperium refreshed in each powdered bolt mark on the concrete. And the pilot with his goggles back came in so low I could see the cockpit rivets. My hidebound boundary tree, my tree of knowledge, my thick-tapped, soft-fledged, airy listening post. The First Kingdom. The royal roads were cow paths. The Queen Mother hunkered on a stool and played the harp strings of milk into a wooden pail. With seasoned sticks, the nobles lorded it over the hindquarters of cattle. Units of measurement were pondered by the cartful, barrowful, and bucketful. Time was a backward rote of names and mishaps, bad harvests, fires, unfair settlements, deaths in floods, murders, and miscarriages. And if my rights to it all came only by their acclamation, what was it worth? I blew hot and blew cold. They were two-faced and accommodating. And seed, breed, and generation still they are holding on, every bit as pious and exacting and demeaned. The first flight. It was more sleepwalk than spasm. Yet that was a time when the times were also in spasm. The ties and the knots running through us split open down the lines of the grain. As I drew close to pebbles and berries, the smell of wild garlic, relearning the acoustic of frost and the meaning of wood note, my shadow over the field was only a spin-off, my empty place an excuse for shifts in the camp, old rehearsals of debts and betrayal. Singly they came to the tree with a stone in each pocket to whistle and bill me back in, and I would collide and cascade through leaves when they left, my point of repose knocked askew. I was mired in attachment until they began to pronounce me a feeder of battlefields. So I mastered new rungs of the air to survey out of reach their bonfires on hills, their hosting and fasting, the levies from Scotland as always, and the people of art diverting their rhythmical chants to fend off the onslaught of winds I would welcome and climb at the top of my bent. Drifting off. The gutter snipe and the albatross gliding for days without a single wing beat were equally beyond me. I yearned for the gannet strike, the unbegrudging concentration of the heron. In the camaraderie of rookeries, in the spiteful vigilance of colonies, I was at home. I learned to distrust the allure of the cuckoo and the gossip of starlings. kept faith with dirty bullfinches, levelled my wit too often to the small-minded wren, and too often caved in to the pathos of water-hens and panicky corncrakes. I gave much credence to stragglers, overrated the composure of blackbirds and the folklore of magpies. But when goldfinch or kingfisher rent the veil of the usual, pinions whispered and braced as I stooped, unwieldy and brimming, my spurs at the ready. The Cleric. I heard new words prayed at cows in the byre, found his sign on the crock and the hidden still, smelled fumes from his censer in the first smokes of morning. Next thing, he was making a progress through gaps, stepping out sights, sinking his crosier deep in the fort hearth. If he had stuck to his own cramp-jawed abbesses and intoners dibbling round the enclosure, his Latin and blather of love, his parchments and scheming in letters shipped over water. But no, he overbore with his unctions and orders. He had to get in on the ground. History that planted its standards on his gables and spires ousted me to the marches of skulking and whinging. Or did I desert? Give him his due. In the end, he opened my path to a kingdom of such scope and neuter allegiance. My emptiness reigns at its whim. The Master. He dwelt in himself, like a rook in an unroofed tower. To get close, I had to climb long and hard up deserted ramparts and not flinch, not raise an eye to search for an eye on the watch from his coign of seclusion. Deliberately, he would unclasp his book of withholding a page at a time, and it was nothing arcane, just the old rules we all had inscribed on our slates. Each character blocked on the parchment, secure in its volume and measure, each maxim given its space. Tell the truth. Do not be afraid. Durable, obstinate notions, like quarrymen's hammers and wedges proofed by intransigent service, like coping stones where you rest in the balm of the wellspring. How flimsy I felt, climbing down the unrailed stairs on the wall, hearing the purpose and venture in a wing flap above me. The Scribes. I never warmed to them. If they were excellent, they were petulant, and jaggy as the holly tree they rendered down for ink. And if I never belonged among them, they could never deny me my place. In the hush of the scriptorium, a black pearl kept gathering in them like the old dry glut inside their quills. In the margin of texts of praise they scratched and clawed. They snarled if the day was dark, or too much chalk had made the vellum bland, or too little left it oily. Under the rumps of lettering they herded myopic angers. Resentment seeded in the uncurling fern heads of their capitals. Now and again I started up miles away, and saw in my absence the sloped cursive of each back, and felt them perfect themselves against me, page by page. Let them remember this not inconsiderable contribution to their jealous art. Holly. It rained when it should have snowed. When we went to gather holly, the ditches were swimming, we were wet to the knees, our hands were all jags, and water ran up our sleeves. There should have been berries, but the sprigs we brought into the house gleamed like smashed bottle glass. Now here I am, in a room that is decked with the red-berried, waxy-leafed stuff, and I almost forget what it's like to be wet to the skin, or longing for snow. I reach for a book like a doubter, and want it to flare round my hand, a black-letter bush, a glittering shield wall, cutting as holly and ice. An artist. I love the thought of his anger, his obstinacy against the rock, his coercion of the substance from green apples, the way he was a dog barking at the image of himself barking, and his hatred of his own embrace of working as the only thing that worked, the vulgarity of expecting ever gratitude or admiration, which would mean a stealing from him. The way his fortitude held and hardened because he did what he knew, his forehead like a hurled bull, travelling unpainted space behind the apple and behind the mountain. In Illo Tempore, the big missiles splayed and dangled silky ribbons of emerald and purple and watery white. Intransitively we would assist, confess, receive. The verbs assumed us. We adored. And we lifted our eyes to the nouns. Altar stone was dawn and monstrance noon. The word rubric itself a bloodshot sunset. Now I live by a famous strand, where seabirds cry in the small hours, like incredible souls, and even the range wall of the promenade that I press down on for conviction hardly tempts me to credit it. On the road. The road ahead kept reeling in at a steady speed. The verges dripped. In my hands, like a rested trophy, the empty round of the steering wheel. The trance of driving made all roads one. The seraph-haunted Tuscan footpath, the green oak alleys of Dordogne, or that track through corn where the rich young man asked his question, "Master, what must I do to be saved?" Or the road where the bird with an earth-red back and a white and black tail, like parquet of flint and jet, wheeled over me in visitation. Sell all you have and give to the poor. I was up and away like a human soul that plumes from the mouth in undulant tenor black-letter Latin. I was one for sorrow, Noah's dove, a panicked shadow crossing the deer path. If I came to earth, it would be by way of a small east window I once squeezed through, scaling heaven by superstition, drunk and happy on a chapel gable. I would roast a night on the slab of exile, then hide in the cleft of that churchyard wall where hand after hand keeps wearing away at the cold, hard-breasted votive granite, and follow me. I would migrate through a high cave mouth into an oaten, sun-warmed cliff, on down the soft-nubbed, clay-floored passage, face brush, wing flap, to the deepest chamber. There a drinking deer is cut into rock. Its haunch and neck rise with the contours. The incised outline curves to a strained, expectant muzzle, and a nostril flared at a dried-up source. For my book of changes, I would meditate that stone-faced vigil, until the long dumbfounded spirit broke cover to raise a dust in the font of exhaustion. Station Island was produced and published by Faber Penguin Audiobooks.